Hey guys, this should be my last video with you. Be so grateful to see you back in person on the next class. But I want to give you a quick reminder that I believe tomorrow is the deadline to bring in your Operation Christmas Child shoebox. So please remember to do that. Be a blessing to some little children in a different part of the world who have so little, and it's a way to get the gospel to them. For today's lesson, we're going to be kind of reviewing a little bit of those northern battles and then moving on to the political discussion that you guys read for today. So you need to have out your worksheet 43. You need to have out your PPTs. And that doesn't look right. Section quiz, not sure what happened there. Section quiz, page 98. So if you'll have all of that ready to go, just kind of have to play it by ear to see if there's time to completely do this. It may be one of those things that has to be stopped by the end of class. But for right now, let's start with worksheet 43. I believe that was on the board for you to have that out in Bellworks, so we should be able to move on to that. We're just going to review and look at those northern battles. And get some information down about those. So let me get this a little bit bigger. Well, never mind, because it's not behaving. I'll read it out loud, and let me get it just as close as I can here, though. Fill up the screen. Okay, so we're looking first at Fort Ticonderoga. This was an American battle. So it's got an A beside of it. You need to write that A down. And I did it in blue. If you've got colored pencils or colored ink pens out to differentiate between the blue and the red, the blue will be the American victories or the colonists or the Continentals, and the red will be the redcoats or the British. All right, the year of Fort Ticonderoga was 1775. That's already there. The leaders, both American, and I would really advise you to write A for American and B for British here to keep these people straight. It's going to be one of the most challenging things, I think, in this chapter is to keep all those generals and all the people straight. So please, this chart will be a big help with that. So remember, you have Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold, who met up, were not very friendly, but decided to go and take Ticonderoga together. So these are both Americans, Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold. The significance of Fort Ticonderoga is they captured all that artillery and cool ammunition and stuff that, remember, Henry Knox dragged for 300 miles back to Boston to run the British out. So the capture of artillery used to later free Boston. The capture of artillery used to later free Boston. The capture of artillery used to later free Boston. And that's the first battle. So far so good for the Americans. But Bunker Hill, it gets a red B. That was a British one. It was almost American, but remember, we ran out of ammo. So also in 1775, the American leader was William Prescott, Prescott, William Prescott, the American. The British was William Howe, Howe, William Howe. And the significance of Bunker Hill was the Patriots' failure to capture Boston. That's the first one. The Patriots' failure to capture Boston. Then there's a semicolon. Heavy British casualties. Heavy British casualties. Remember, it is a British victory, but they had way more cost than the Americans did, or the Patriots. So, Patriots' failure to capture Boston, semicolon, heavy British casualties. And then one more northern battle is Quebec. That is a British victory. 1775. And both American, you're supposed to list the leaders if they're mentioned in your book. So these two guys are mentioned. You've got Richard Montgomery as one American, the one who came from Montreal, from the west, and then you got Benedict Arnold, who came up from the east, where they rendezvoused at Quebec. Richard Montgomery and Benedict Arnold. Give you a second. Richard Montgomery and Benedict Arnold. And the significance of Quebec is it was the last Patriot attack on Canada. The last Patriot attack on Canada. Then a semicolon, colonial respect for the British Army. Colonial respect for the British Army. Last Patriot attack on Canada, colonial respect for the British Army. All right, that should be enough time. And those are the three northern battles. That's all you've read about so far as battlefield. So let's go back to see what's up. All right, the next thing is just to kind of keep going on those northern battles and letting you kind of see what that was like, is to pick up where you left off in the videos on the DVD. So your teacher will run that from the computer. So we'll pause this here in just a second, but remember, you got to keep your heads up. You may not put your heads down. This is absolutely, you need to watch every second of this. It's up to 45 minutes. I think first period will have more like 35 minutes. Third period will have about 30 minutes to watch, and fourth will have 45. So pause this video and switch over to the DVD. Then come back to this video for the remainder of the discussion here. Okay guys, so you should have out your PPTs and your SQ and a red pen. Get ready to take some notes. Let me move this back a little bit here to kind of get in more now that I'm through with your copying from the chart. I know that's not easy, but hopefully today's the last day that we'll be challenged with that. All right, what you guys read for today, the section is called Debating Independence. So it's like we're going to just kind of seesaw back and forth from battlefield to the politics, battlefield to the politics, and back and forth like that. So today, while all those northern battles were going on, we're going to see what was happening back in Philadelphia. So when we think about you know, the colonists and what all they've been put through. Remember, chapter 5 was just full of all kinds of actions and taxes and no representation. You think about what all they've been through, you know, they realized as time went on that they were going to have to choose which side. Now, a lot of them did not really agree with the British, but yet they were not willing to go against the British. So let's talk about how people kind of chose their sides that they chose during this time. It's really come down to George versus George here. George Washington, leader of the Continental Army, versus King George III. So here's how it kind of sifted out. About a third to half of all the colonists were ardent patriots. They were all in. They felt like it was worth dying for the cause of liberty. So that was about a third to a half, and that number increased as time went on, and they suffered more tyranny of the British. About a fifth, 20%, considered themselves to be loyal subjects of the king. They never did move over to the patriot side. Then the rest of them tried to not take a side. We call that neutral. They became Switzerland here, where you couldn't take either side. And they all had their reasons for choosing that. So let's go through the reasons that each side took. So first of all, let's talk about the loyalists. Now, you know that loyalists are the ones who took the side of Britain, and some took the side of Britain politically or economically, and some even put on a red coat and fought with them too. So here's the thinking of loyalists, and I can kind of understand it in some cases. Now, another name that we can call loyalists are Tories. Tory is the name of a political party in England that was loyal to the king, so they often loyalists here in the colonies were called Tories as well. And they had political, economic, and religious reasons for choosing the side of Britain. Politically, they didn't see how people could rule themselves. They feared that it would be a mob, grab your pitchfork, grab your torches, grab your shovels, and let's go beat somebody up. They feared that it would turn into that. Look what happened in the streets of Boston, and that a mob could be just as tyrannical as the king was being over them. So politically, they didn't quite trust self-government. Now, economically, some of them feared they're losing the connections they had in their trade. Like they had really successful businesses with their English trade partners, and they didn't want to lose that. That's kind of understandable. So there were economic reasons people stayed with Britain on that as well. There were also some who religiously wouldn't do it, wouldn't switch over. They believed Romans chapter 13, and let me read the verse to you from chapter 13, verse 2, that says, "Whosoever resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive unto themselves damnation." Well, they took that at its face and said, we believe it would be sin to leave the British government. So, you tend to be judgmental on loyalists, but when you consider their reasoning, some of them are pretty reasonable, I think. Now, what did the people do as time went on and it became, as the Patriot side grew? Some fled to lands that were held by the English. They went to Canada. In some cases, they went to the British West Indies, the Caribbean islands that the British governed. Some stayed home and just tried to keep their mouths shut, keep their opinions to themselves so that they wouldn't be attacked and treated badly by the Patriot side. So some even had to leave everything that they had worked for all their lives and feared losing their property if they left it. So some tried to just hang in there. So just to review here, loyalists were American colonists who remained loyal to Great Britain. They were often referred to as Tories, Royalists, theirs with an R, or the King's Men by the Patriots. Historians estimate that 15 to 20% of the white population were loyalists, and many loyalists fled the country at the start of the Revolution. All right, so there's your reasons: religious, political, and economic reasons people chose the loyalist side. What about the Patriot side? They also had political, economic, and religious reasons. Loss of liberty was something you heard quite a bit. No taxation without representation. They were tired of that. They had had their own self-government since Jamestown. Remember, Jamestown had the House of Burgesses from 1607. They were, and of course, with the Intolerable Acts, Britain had taken away Massachusetts' self-government. So they felt that was really and truly at stake, that their ability to govern themselves would be truly at stake. So that would be their political reasons: liberty. Some also had economic reasons. They thought that the economic policies of England only allowing them to trade with just them, remember the triangular trade, was very limiting, and they felt like they should be able to trade with whomever they wished. They should be able to make those decisions themselves. So some had economic reasons as well. Then there were religious reasons. Remember back to the effects of the Great Awakening, where people realized that they didn't need England to be over their churches and their religions. Then why would they need a king if everybody's created equal? Why should authority be born into position over them. So the Great Awakening had a profound effect on people's thinking about liberty. In Baptist churches, often the rallying cry was heard toward liberty. So there's the question of submission to a tyrannical government. There's the desire for religious freedom. Do you remember the Quebec Act as part of the Intolerable Acts, where the British government says, yeah, there's Catholicism, you got to do Catholicism there in Quebec. Well, what was to prevent England from saying, you're going to all you colonists have to now be Church of England, just like if you lived here in England, you'd have to do that too. So they felt like their religious freedom was very much at stake. Now, they were not ignorant of the scripture in Romans chapter 13 either. And they did not see themselves as rebelling against government. They wanted government. They wanted to govern themselves. They wanted it done, in a fair way. So they weren't saying we're kicking out all government, we're going to anarchy at all. They were saying that government should treat its people well, and this government is not. Now, they were also influenced by the theories of John Locke. John Locke was introduced in the last chapter, his thought, and he viewed government as being a contract between the people and the leadership. And that if either half of that was not pulling their weight or doing it right, then you had the right to throw them off and replace it. So government is a contract between the people and their rulers. That really began to resonate with the colonists. All mankind being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. The end of the law was not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. The only task of government is protection of private property. So the ideas in his writings were a lot. He did a lot of writing. They read him and they started believing that this is the way government should operate. So John Locke was very much a self-government, small government, non-authoritarian. Then there were colonists who didn't take either side. They didn't become patriots and they did not become loyalists. They remained what is called neutral. Some for business reasons. Some were like, oh, if I take a side, I'm serving both of you here. I don't want to have to decide between you. I'll lose business if I do. Some were just out in such remote areas near the frontier that it really wasn't affecting them, so they didn't feel like they had to make a choice. And some were pacifists, like the Moravians and the Quakers. They refused to fight, so they would have chosen to stay neutral. So around 20% of the population, I guess that would be around that. That probably varied and fluctuated some because as time went on through this war, the numbers did fluctuate. The Patriot side tended to grow a little bit more. Well, so let me take the second now to show you a video on Patriots versus Loyalists. Let me get this going here. This thing's out of calibration. I'll run it from here.
Name-calling, tar and feathering, and confiscating of property. These were just a few of the battle tactics used in the War of Philosophies. It was a civil war going on right in the middle of the War for Independence. On the one side were Loyalists, or Tories, the King's men, people like Joseph Brant. On the other side were freedom fighters, sons of liberty, out-and-out patriots like Nathan Hale. The Patriots were zealous for independence. They reasoned that, since they weren't represented in the English government, they shouldn't be required to submit to England. Instead, they were willing to sacrifice everything, even their lives, to win freedom. In the end, Nathan Hale was required to do just that. Hale was a bright young man. After graduating from Yale around 16, he began teaching school in Connecticut. He was only 20 when the War for Independence broke out, but he was one of the first to speak up and rally his townspeople to fight. He bade his students goodbye and took his place as first lieutenant in the Army. Soon he was promoted to captain. When Washington asked for someone to go to New York City and get information on the British, Hale was the only one who volunteered, so off he went on his mission. He gathered all the information he needed and was waiting by the lake for his ride back when he was captured by the Redcoats. He was hanged the next morning as a spy. To the Patriots, he was a hero. Joseph Brant, on the other hand, was a hardcore loyalist. His reasoning, the colonies needed to obey their God-given authority. Besides, he feared the Americans. You see, Brant was a Mohawk chief, and he was afraid the Americans would take away Indian land if they defeated the British. So he did everything he could to support what he believed was right. He won 4 Indian nations to the British side. He attacked American settlements, and he was promoted to captain in the British Army. Once the war was over, he found out that he was right. His land now belonged to America, and he couldn't work out a land claim with the new official government. Thankfully, the British gave him a home up in Canada, along with many other loyalist Mohawks. Both Joseph Brant and Nathan Hale fought bravely during the War for Independence, and for both, their devotion to country cost them dearly. For Brant, it was his land. For Hale, his life. Whether patriot or loyalist, heroes were born during this time of revolution and sacrifice.
All right, let me get this to the computer. All right, so what happened to affect people's thinking and rally them to the Patriot side? Well, one of the major things, and here comes your first PPT, was a pamphlet called Common Sense. Now, when we say pamphlet, it was really like a booklet, like a 40-some page booklet that would have been, bound and turning the page. It's not like a pamphlet that you just kind of fold out and then you fold back up. So it's more, if you can think booklet, would be more descriptive of it. So this was, of course, you need to know who wrote it, Thomas Paine. It built the case for American independence from Britain. Listed so many reasons why America should leave Britain. And it was probably the most influential pamphlet, really maybe ever written, in political history anyway. So here's some things you need to have down for common sense. And then for Thomas Paine, who is your number 11, you need to know that he's the author of Common Sense. Now, he's just been in America for a couple of years when he saw America as really the land of all opportunity. And he's very sold on it. Some video that I'll show you later will kind of give you a little more background on Thomas Paine. He's kind of a radical guy, though. We don't really remember him other than this pamphlet because he was pretty radical. He's a deist, very much didn't believe in Jesus at all. But God used him anyway to author this pamphlet and to really convince people to decide. This thing was like a bestseller. It would have been like millions of copies in today's numbers. So it's probably a few 100,000 back then. So, Common Sense. So in this pamphlet, he lists quite a few reasons that the things that the king has done to them, the tyranny that's been wreaked upon them. Why would you not separate is really what the cause was. This is a common sense thing to do, to separate. He also wrote another fairly influential pamphlet called The American Crisis. And this one was written to the troops, the ones who were suffering in the wintertime, not well clothed, not well fed, probably very sickly and unhealthy. And actually, George Washington had this read to the troops to rally them, to encourage them. And here's an excerpt. One of the things that I like the best about this publication. He says, "These are the times that try men's soul. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country." Now his imagery here, summer soldier, this is like a bandwagon person, somebody who's only there when the weather's nice. But if it turns a little uncomfortable, they're out of there. He says, "You're not that," or the sunshine patriot. So you are not that. "But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. For though the flame of liberty may sometimes cease to shine, the coal can never expire." So he's rallying the soldiers, saying, you guys are awesome. You are in here, you're in these terrible conditions, and you're doing it for liberty, and you're going to get the payoff someday. So it did lift the morale of the troops to hear this. And that was called the American Crisis. All right, so really within just a few weeks or months of common sense making the rounds, the Continental Congress was ready to take action. They were ready to put something on paper to declare their independence that they would then sign and then ship over to England to give to the king, saying, "We are no longer a part of you." So Continental Congress gets busy. They different states are making different statements. Virginia's House of Burgesses are like, yes, we're going to go for independence. So Virginia's all in. And really, all but two do state that they're all in. And Pennsylvania and New York need a little more work. They're a little bit hesitant. But every other colony is like, yes, we're in favor of doing this. So the Congress gets busy. They select some committees. Richard Henry Lee says, "These united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they're absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved." So he makes the motion that this Congress move on writing this document, and they select a committee of 5 of their members, primarily written by Thomas Jefferson, who's in his early 30s at this time, very brilliant mind. So he's pretty much, the other 4 on the committee are like, we're going to leave it up to you, Tom. Go right ahead. And so he's in this hot room in downtown Philadelphia, and he's writing and writing and writing. And July 2nd, I'll back that up. July 2nd, he brings his finished document, and they're like, yay. Well, except for New York. New York still wasn't there, and they certainly wanted to present a united, unanimous declaration for the colonies to know about. And so they worked and learned a little bit more, took out, I think they just removed a few things, and by July 4th, 1776, a very famous date that you need to know, July 4th, 1776, our birthday, it got the unanimous support that it was looking for. So John Adams writes, there should be fireworks and parties and celebrations, and a lot of our traditions on July 4th come from John Adams writing about celebrating our independence. Well, as you know, we still didn't have our independence. We had to get this shipped off to the colonies to be read. We had to get it shipped across the ocean to present to England, and we had to beat the redcoats on the battlefield to do it too. It would take 5 more years at least of fighting on the battlefield before we actually convinced Britain that we meant what we said on this document. Now, when I return to you, I'm going to want to read this document to you. It's a pretty special thing. So for your number 12, Thomas Jefferson, the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. And Declaration of Independence, the famous document that declared that the colonies were broken free of British rule. Now, There were other committees working too. There was another committee led by John Dickinson of Delaware that got busy writing a plan for government, because yeah, we're throwing off the British government, but we got to have something in its place for when we do take over. So there's committees working on the document, there's committees working on what form of government we're going to have. So lots of things are going on politically. All right, so if there's time to Kahoot, except for third period, and I think you know why. Third period, you'll just get your papers, and the teacher will just call out the answers, and you make corrections in red if you need to, or make more notes, more complete answers. But if there is time to Kahoot, I have it ready for you. Let me give you your homework before I let you go. Let's see, there's one more. Now, this is just, I don't want you reading any more sections. There's some more things I want to do, some more video I want to show you to kind of reinforce what I just went through today. So I just want you reading worksheet 41 and 42. It's real publications. One of them is a loyalist who is publishing in the paper his opinion on why they should stay loyal to the British Crown. And the other is actually the pen name of Thomas Paine. He calls himself the Forester as he's writing to the newspapers for the calls for independence. So you need to read those two articles. It's on, I believe, just on the front on 41. There's some questions on the back on 42. I want you to answer those. And then in next class, I'll take a grade for completion as well as your PPTs from Bell work. But I also want to spend some time discussing that. So do a good job on that article, on that worksheet, and it is due, and I don't have it written up here because the thing's out of calibration, but this being Wednesday, this is due Friday. All right, see you guys.